From your local election headquarters, this is Eyewitness Newsmakers with your hosts, Jane Ann Bugda and Andy Mahalchik.
Hello and welcome to Newsmakers from your local election headquarters. I'm Andy Mahalchik.
And I'm Jane Ann Bugda. Today we are focusing on the State House race in the 114th District. This district covers several communities in Lackawanna County.
We'll hear from the Democratic incumbent State Representative Bridget Malloy-Kozarowski and Republican candidate James May. For more information on the candidates, go to pahomepage.com.
Our conversation begins when this edition of Newsmakers from your local election headquarters begins right after this.
And welcome back to Eyewitness Newsmakers from your local election headquarters. I'm Andy Mahalchik along with producer Jane Ann Bugda. In this segment, we're going to be talking to Bridget Malloy-Kozarowski, the Democratic incumbent state representative in the 114th District. She'll be facing off in November against Republican James May. Bridget, thanks for joining us today here on Newsmakers.
Hi there, thanks for having me tonight.
Well, let me start off. First of all, tell the folks at home, the viewers, the possible voters, a little bit about yourself and why you decided to run for re-election.
So I am currently the state representative in the 114th District, a new position I've held for 18 months. I won in a special election in April of 2019. I grew up here in Clark Summit. I have 4 children. My husband, Joe, grew up in Moosic, Pennsylvania. The two of us went to high school together, and we went back out to Philadelphia to go to school and work, and we moved back home when we had our first baby. So I have 4 kids, and when we moved back here, I worked as a nurse at the Mercy Hospital for a bit and at the Northeast Surgery Center. And as a nurse, I think I was really keenly aware of the broken healthcare system, and I've always kind of thought maybe I should segue into something in terms of insurance and health insurance and maybe making sure it's accessible and affordable. And I had the opportunity to run for office, and I'm now in the State House, and I'm looking forward to being able to do that.
And Bridget, the reason for us gathering here today is just to get to know you a little better so the voters can get to know you a little better. So tell us a little bit about the top priorities of your campaign.
So our top priorities now, obviously, they've segued a bit with the COVID-19 crisis that our state is now in. Many businesses have closed. Businesses are reopening now, but there's all kinds of restrictions. People are in unemployment, and now my main focus is to help. We need to make sure people get back on their feet. And it's my job to make sure I'm able to help them. So that's a big part of our campaign. Now, campaigning has changed, obviously, very different. I was in a special election. We did our campaign, but in the past, you were able to really touch voters by knocking on doors and having gatherings and picnics and all those kind of things that we haven't been able to have them here because of the COVID-19 crisis. So. We're just really reaching out to people by doing phone banks and, mailers and our Facebook, social media, that kind of stuff. It's changed, but it's working. And so that's how our campaign right now is focusing on keeping people safe, and making sure that people are informed.
And how do you think, talking about COVID-19, there's been a lot of questions and concerns on both sides of the aisle about how the state has handled the COVID-19 pandemic and moving forward. What's your assessment of how the state has handled COVID-19 so far? Would you change anything moving forward?
Well, COVID-19 first and foremost is a pandemic that we haven't seen here in the United States in 100 years. It was a novice virus that we were learning as days went on. The science was changing, the research was changing. So, if you look back from today until March, there's things that obviously you could change and see, that wasn't something that we necessarily had to do. We could have kept people safe, but at the time, you just can't take that risk. We followed the guidelines of the CDC, the governor and Dr. Levine followed research. The most important thing was to keep Pennsylvanians safe. We could not overwhelm our hospital systems, the vulnerable. And I think that when you look at what we did in Pennsylvania. At one point in the state of Pennsylvania, we were the 3rd most infected state in the country. And because we were really, really good, and I'm really proud of Pennsylvanians, I'm really proud of the work that we did by making sure people understood this virus and how it was transferred. And we got people to make sure they're wearing masks and social distancing and washing their hands. And people took care of each other. Businesses had to close and shutdowns. But by doing that, Pennsylvania went from the third most infected state to the seventh in a month. And that we have to know that we did the right thing. And that's most important. I mean, we lost 8,000 Pennsylvanians. There's 200,000 Americans that have died from this virus. So yeah, when you look back, you could say things, but that's in everything in life. I mean, what we knew now, if we knew what we knew in March, yeah, we could have done things differently. But the main thing was we had to keep Pennsylvania safe, and it was so hard, and there were so many sacrifices. But I'm really proud of what we did.
And let me ask you this, Representative, because of the COVID-19, our economy and some of our jobs took a hit here in the Commonwealth. So how do we help bring back the state's economy and then bring jobs back to our region?
Well, that's a good question, because that's the main thing. I mean, our businesses and our small businesses, I mean, there's many sacrifices, but I believe our small businesses really, they've been devastated. So the two main things that I really want to focus on, and part of my job to make sure happen, are the federal CARES Act money. That funding has to come back here to Pennsylvanians, and it has to be in forms of a grant. We cannot have these businesses take loans. The loans, we cannot make them have to pay things back. I mean, the most important thing is that we focus on tackling a safe economic recovery plan. And I think those two things that I mentioned, and we have a wonderful working relationship with our Congressman Cartwright, and he is keenly aware of the needs that people have here, and also the fact that the funding has to come back here. We need to get that CARES Act back here for Pennsylvania business owners to get them back on their feet.
Another big issue, of course, and it's like the weather. They say people talk about it, but can't do anything about it. It seems property tax reform, some kind of property tax reform in Harrisburg, just can't get any traction. What's your take on it, and what's your viewpoint moving forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, property tax affects all of us. And we all know somebody a parent, a neighbor, a friend, somebody who's worried about losing their home in retirement because they're on a fixed income and now they can't afford this property tax bill. So those are the folks that I really want to focus on and I really want to help. In Harrisburg, I mean, I think this bill's been around since I've been in high school, House Bill 76. They've got some things correct with it, but there's things that have to change. And this bill eliminates property tax, right? So we had a Republican governor, a Republican House, and a Republican Senate, and the bill still didn't pass. So obviously there was things wrong with this bill. It's unacceptable to eliminate property taxes for millionaire with, somebody that owns a summer home or real estate investor who owns multiple dwellings, and they throw tax to the middle class workers. We can't let that happen. So the current House and Senate bill to eliminate property tax as written leaves the state with a tax raising roughly $14 billion a year to fund education, which is most important. That to me, we cannot forget that our public schools are what are funded from these property tax, and we must protect them. I go back to things like the Delaware loophole that'll create a sensible reform of tax, and this is something that we can work on in Harrisburg. House Bill 76 has some things right, and I understand that that's where we need to get to, but we have to change some things on it to get it right here at home.
Well, Representative Kozrowski, we're coming to the end of our interview, but we want you to address the viewers and tell them why they should re-elect you to the State House.
So I asked the voters to support me. I mean, as a nurse going to the State House, I clearly had a lot to learn. I knew that, and I did learn a lot. It was like baptism by fire. I was like drinking from a fire hose, to be honest, and then we threw a pandemic into the mix. But I am very proud of what I've accomplished in those 18 months that I've been in the State House. I was able to bring $8.9 million back to my district. I introduced 12 pieces of legislation addressing everything from protecting those from domestic violence, protecting children's insurance under the CHIP program, and a nurse compact law. I also passed a House bill, my first House bill, in a unanimous support in a Republican-held House, and this bill specifically goes to the food packing industries. I am on the Agriculture Committee, which is really important to me in this district, and this bill will help our food processors afford and have grant money for their PPE equipment to make them safe and to keep their industry alive and moving. So I'm really proud of that, and I just would hope that I can continue to do that kind of work. I'm excited to go back to the State House. I have a really good relationship working across the aisle with people because that's the only way we get things done. And I think as a nurse, and any nurse will tell you, and certainly the nurses that I've worked with here for the last 18 years, when there's a problem, we do not blame anybody. We work as a team. And for 27 years as a nurse, that's what I was told to do, and that's how I worked. And we always worked as a team, and that's my skill set that I bring to the House of Representatives.
Okay, we appreciate your time, Representative Bridget Malloy-Kozarowski. Thank you for joining us today on Eyewitness Newsmakers from your local election headquarters, and we will be right back with more. And welcome back to Eyewitness Newsmakers from your local election headquarters. Andy Bohalchik, along with producer Jane Ann Bugda. And on this segment, we're talking to James May, the Republican candidate for the House seat in the 114th district, currently held by Democrat Bridget Kozarowski. First of all, James May, thank you for joining us today on Newsmakers. Let me start with the first question. Tell us, the viewers, a little bit about yourself and why you decided to run for public office.
Well, as you know, for the past 9 years, I served as the Regional Community Relations Coordinator for PennDOT. And throughout that time, there were so many times when I would have people come up to me and say, here is a way that we can make government more efficient. Here's a way that we can make government work for the people more than what it does now. Here's a way that we can save money when we're out working on the roads. I'd hear from contractors. And I just heard from people on a very regular basis on ways that we can make government more efficient as the Community Relations Coordinator for PennDOT. So often I had to reply to them, that's a great idea. I hear you. You're exactly right. But you need to go talk to your local elected state representative because that's not an issue that can be addressed here in Lackawanna County. It has to be addressed out of Harrisburg. So after 9 years of telling this to people, I decided to actually leave PennDOT and try to become one of the elected officials who could actually do something about improving our government and rather just talking about it. I was also an Army chaplain before that. And so my background is in helping people, helping soldiers, and that's what I want to try to do in Harrisburg.
And James, part of the reason that we're here today is to learn more about you and your campaign. So tell us a little bit about your top priorities.
Well, as a former Army chaplain and serving in Iraq, I served in Iraq with the soldiers on the front lines. I came back from Iraq, worked for 1.5 years at Walter Reed Army Medical Center with soldiers who have made an incredible sacrifice for our freedom. While I was at Walter Reed, I also helped officiate funerals over at Arlington National Cemetery. So I was on active duty for 7 years in the military, but for the last 3 years that I was on active duty, I had this very unique privilege of serving with the soldiers on the front lines, serving with soldiers who had been injured, and serving with soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice for our nation. So I had a front row seat for 3 years to witness firsthand the sacrifice that the American soldier has made for our freedom. Right now, what I see taking place in Pennsylvania especially is that while we have soldiers all around the world who are willingly sacrificing everything for our freedom, we have politicians in Harrisburg who are taking our freedom away. And I would start right at the governor's office. What is taking place right now with the governor, with these shutdowns, with this abuse of power, with this overreach, the way that they are shutting down businesses in an unfair way? I see that not just as being unfair, I see it as taking away freedom that our soldiers have fought and died for here in America. So for me, my top priority right now is trying to restore freedom for Americans and for Pennsylvanians here. So we're trying to restore freedom for Pennsylvanians because a lot of what's taking place, I think, is really taking away those freedoms. So that's really my top sort of overarching big picture. Some of the other things I really want to try to focus on are helping our veterans. As a veteran myself, having worked at Walter Reed, having worked at Arlington, having spent time in combat with soldiers, to really try to help our veterans. I want to focus on that. Fixing our roads, as you know, as the Community Relations Coordinator for PennDOT, I've heard a lot of feedback on ways that we can fix our roads. So trying to help our vets fix our roads, trying to get some businesses coming back into the area, looking to eliminate our school property tax and replace it with a sales tax. So there's a lot of things that we're working on, and those are just a few of the priorities that we have right now.
James, you mentioned COVID-19, the pandemic. Your assessment of how the state, whether it be D or R, how's the Commonwealth handled the COVID-19 pandemic in the past and moving forward?
Well, I think at first everybody was in agreement that we had to do something, that we had to sort of take a breath, slow down, and figure out what was happening. This was a new virus. And so for the first few weeks, everybody was on board, and we were all in agreement that we needed to sort of shut some things down, pause, take a breath, and sort of get a grip on what was taking place. But what we started to see happen was there was a complete unfairness in the way that businesses were shut down. We had situations where a small mom and pop business was being closed down for weeks and for months, while at the same time the big box stores were allowed to remain open. They had a waiver process that was sort of, hit and miss, and how you filled out the paperwork determined whether or not your business could be open. Even recently, the governor came out and said that at 10 o'clock, you can no longer sell alcohol. You look and you say, what is that doing to VFWs and our local restaurants and taverns? But how they go about just randomly picking 10 o'clock is this time, or this business gets shut down. I think the longer it goes on, many of us are looking and saying what he is doing is an overreach. It's an abuse of power. It's unfair the way that they are treating these businesses, where we are shutting down small mom and pop businesses while leaving the big corporations open. And people are just looking at this and saying, why is the casino allowed to operate at 50% capacity, but a small family-owned restaurant has to operate at 25% capacity. So we're
James,
just seeing that unfairness take place across the region.
So you mentioned that. So how do we bring the state economy back and bring jobs more into our region, into the Commonwealth?
Well, the immediate, as we're looking at bringing jobs into the Commonwealth, I think one of the first things we need to do is start allowing the businesses that are here already to start to open up, to allow them to have the freedom to be able to go out and to open up their businesses, to serve alcohol after 10 o'clock. Some of these restrictions that are in place right now, I think, are just long overdue, that they need to be opened back up again and let these businesses get back up on their feet, let them operate, trust the business owners. A business owner is going to be just as cautious as the big box store. So I think the first step has to be that we need to allow these businesses that are already here to really begin to open up and to begin serving the customers and getting back to a life that is normal again. In addition to that, we can do some more things with cutting our taxes. There's a lot of regulations right now that we need to be working on, getting rid of some of the regulations, the red tape that is tying stuff up. I will tell you firsthand, I saw that take place at PennDOT. It's across the board in our government. There is so much red tape and regulations that are slowing down the economy, slowing down growth. And if we can continue to be safe with what we're doing, but get rid of some of those sort of nonsense regulations, I think we can really open up our economy and open up the region to much better growth than what we've had.
James, talking about property tax reform, everybody talks about it, as you know. Several years ago, a tie vote in the Senate, it failed, House Bill 76. What about property tax? How will you make that a reality? What form do you think it should take?
I have supported for years House Bill 76. Actually, it used to be House Bill 1776, and I supported it back then. I absolutely support the elimination of the school property tax. The reason is because the way that we tax our school property right now, the way that we tax homes, is just a completely random, unfair, haphazard way that we do it. Now, you can be going out door to door and talking to people, and you'll have one house on one side of the street that maybe they put a garage on recently, or they added to it, or somebody moved in, and it's the same exact house across the street, but somebody's lived there longer, or they didn't add the garage, and they have different taxes. And the entire way that we do this is unfair. If we would move away from the school property tax and move it into a sales tax, that way everybody is allowed to pay a little bit toward what we're doing, and everybody can contribute a little bit instead of having just the homeowners contribute a whole bunch. Plus, it gives more flexibility and ownership to the homeowner, to the individual person. So if you're a senior and you're spending less, your taxes are less, rather than just this one-size-fits-all approach, like our government often has, is a one-size-fits-all approach. So I have supported House Bill 76 for years now, and will continue to do so.
And James, we have one last question for you. We want you to look at the camera and tell the voters why they should vote for you for the State House of Representatives.
Well, most people probably recognize me as the regional press director for PennDOT, but before I was with them, I was actually an Army chaplain, served on 7 years on active duty with the military, had the privilege of serving in Iraq with soldiers on the front lines, came back from Iraq, worked at Walter Reed Army Medical Center for a year and a half with soldiers who have been injured, and served as the chaplain at Arlington National Cemetery for soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice for our nation. I have seen firsthand the sacrifice that the American soldier has been willing to make for our freedom. And I said it before and I'll say it again, I believe that we have politicians in Harrisburg who are taking away those freedoms. My goal is to restore freedom for Pennsylvania residents in Harrisburg. My goal is to restore that freedom that our soldiers have fought and died for. My goal is to restore that freedom so that the what is happening right now in our government, where politicians are taking away the freedom that our soldiers have died for, that will no longer continue. My goal is to restore freedom in Pennsylvania.
All right, James May, Republican candidate for the 114th State House seat in Lackawanna County. James, thank you. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you very much.
And you're watching Newsmakers from your local election headquarters, and we'll be back right after this.
And you just heard the two candidates running for the seat in the 114th State House, Democrat Bridget Malloy-Kozarowski and Republican James May. You can hear their take on all of the issues on PAHomepage.com.
And we have other stories there and other information on other candidates. For Andy Michalczyk and everyone behind the scene, we thank you for joining us for Newsmakers from your local election headquarters. I'm Jane Ann Bugda, and we'll talk to you next time.